Number 9 is the Green Bay Packers. And to me, this is easily a top 3 team in the NFC. I think they could be vying for the number 1 spot in the NFC.
Easily.
I think when you look at the Green Bay Packers, it's really a tale of 2 seasons. It's how they started their first 9 games, weeks 1 through 9, and then weeks 10 after. And a lot of what they struggled with, I thought, was game planning issues and poor script management. 20.9% of their first half drives featured an explosive play weeks 1 through 9. That was 32nd in the NFL, while Jordan Love had the highest target depth in the NFL. So they were trying to get deep plays down the field, but defenses were planning for that more. But from week 10's onward, 59.2% of the first half drives featured an explosive play, which was 3rd in the NFL. Matt LaFleur made 3 major changes. Number 1 is they emphasized explosive plays, and that led to higher scoring rates. Number 2, the game script was better. The first 15 plays, weeks 1 through 9, which I put a lot of emphasis on Matt LaFleur, because first 15 plays are, you're a coach, you come into the game, these are your plays in your back pocket that you're starting off the game with. 30th in success rate, weeks 1 through 9. Weeks 10 onward, they were number 1 in success rate. Matt LaFleur, mid-season, changed his identity as a play caller, and he improved drastically. And that's why the 2-4 start led to a 7-3 finish, because they became one of the best offenses, one of the most explosive, consistent offenses in the NFL that also jumped out to early leads. Weeks 1 through 9, they averaged 1.6 points in the first quarter, only above the Giants and Jets, and 2.9 points in the second quarter, which was 32nd. Week 10 onward, they averaged almost 15 first half points and 7.2 first quarter points, which was 2nd in the NFL. They made those drastic changes, and that's why even early on in the season, I don't think Jordan Love played bad, because the common dialogue around Jordan Love is he only had half of a great season. But I thought he only really had 3 or 4 bad games, because to begin the year against the Bears, the Falcons, and the Saints, I thought he played well. It was just the poor game script from Matt LaFleur and the miscommunication of a very young offense that led to them being so bad. In the second half, Matt LaFleur turned it around, and that's why you got better returns. But this offense was legitimately horrible in the first half. Now, understanding what works, having a full offseason to know what works, I'm super confident in this team. I'm super confident in the scheme change, going from a 3-4 to a 4-3. So now these pass rushers can be more aggressive and they don't have to worry about dropping back. Mm-hmm. And I'm also really high on the offensive line. This was a young offensive line that had the second best pass block win rate. The one thing that's concerning for me out of everything is their running back position. I think Aaron Jones is better than Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs last season had a terrible, inefficient season behind an offensive line that I think is somewhat decent. Josh Jacobs ranked 48th out of 49 running backs in explosive run rate this past year. There's a lot of mileage on his legs. He's gotten a ton of workload, even though he's still a young player. And I think Aaron Jones at this point, while more injury prone, just gives you a more explosive factor. Can Josh Jacobs return back to form? Maybe. He's only a year removed from leading the league in rushing yards. But last year, he was genuinely awful. And that's my biggest concern with this team. And the kicker. You know, Carlson, I think, is probably going to lose his job to Greg Joseph.
Andres, right? Andres Carlson? That's his brother?
Yeah, it's his brother. Daniel Carlson's brother.
So I look at the Packers, and again, I try to, when I'm evaluating the Packers for this upcoming season, I don't look at the offense as much because you trust what they're going to produce. Of course, you have Jordan Love, Matt LaFleur. They really did click for the last 9 weeks of the season. You mentioned the 3 games early on that you think that he played poorly. I think you have to bring up that Raiders game versus
I'm saying he played well those first 3 games. Gotcha. The games he played poorly in, I thought, were the Raiders, Lions, Vikings.
Correct. That's agreed. That's kind of what that's exactly what I meant to say. If that didn't come out clearly, apologize. But again, the last 9 weeks of the season for Jordan Love were amazing. And you saw Jaden Reed start to break out into the scene. You saw Aaron Jones, when he was healthy, what he was able to input into this offense. Of course, you don't have him anymore. Josh Jacobs, I agree with you, although not the same rusher that he was 2 years ago. I think that in this offense, given the firepower that they do have. Hopefully Christian Watson can stay healthy. I am a believer. I think that he is a big play waiting to happen. His body simply fails him. If he's on the field, I do think that he's a positive. You saw Dontavian Wicks in his one play. He was able to take it to the crib. Obviously, he has the skill set to be great. And then what we're hearing in early reports is that Romeo Doubs is still his favorite target, his most consistent target. And we saw that last year. There's options on this offense for Jordan Love to have success with. Now, why I say I look at the defenses, there's now a change in philosophy. Obviously, we understand that the defensive coordinator that they had last season was horrendous, and people were very vocal about it. But you bring in Jeff Hafley from Boston College. He was a 4-year head coach over there. Now he comes in, brings you a new philosophy, but you do have some really good personnel on this defense. Of course, we talk about Rashawn Gary. Hopefully his usage comes up. We understand the impact that he does have on that defensive line. You, of course, have to respect Quay Walker, who he's making strides as a linebacker. But the secondary, Stokes, of course. You have Jair Alexander, who is the highest paid corner. Can he stay healthy? You bring in Xavier McKinney, one of the better safeties in the game also. There's talent at every level when you look at the Green Bay Packers. To me, they have the roster that, we can be talking about them as serious contenders. It's just me a matter of, can they put it all together on the defensive side, even though we know they do have the personnel. I trust this offense. I have no questions about it. This is going to be a fun team to watch.
I think all of these teams in the top 10, outside of like one or two, all of the common theme of these teams have questions, but you have an elite quarterback, so we probably don't care as much, right? Like, I think we look at teams just outside the top 10. We look at Miami, we look at Dallas, like Tua and Dak, really solid quarterback play. But I don't think we think of them as like elite upper echelon type guys, right? And that's how I think of Jordan Love. That's why I have the Packers above those type of teams that, although they still have question marks, you just trust the quarterback and the offense so much that it's hard to see a world where this team, at a bare minimum, doesn't make the playoffs. And at a bare minimum, they should be a team that is looking for that number one seed, that is looking for a championship run, because you have Jordan Love coming off his, more or less his rookie season, first year starting in the NFL, and you already won a playoff game. And he had a playoff moment that a lot of quarterbacks shit, like Lamar, 2-time MVP, who hasn't really had that moment in the playoffs yet. So although this is only year 2 starting for a quarterback, the expectations are super high. The only real questions I have for this team, I think there's a few. One, Josh Jacobs is a valid question. You also have Marshawn Lloyd, who's a third-round pick who has some explosiveness, but is dealing with a soft tissue, I believe a hamstring injury in training camp right now. So it looks like A.J. Dillon's going to be the backup there. And Josh Jacobs and A.J. Dillon being your 1-2 punch at running back when you've had historically Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, so you kind of have that thunder and lightning effect. I don't love that. And Josh Jacobs is coming off his least efficient season of his career so far. At the wide receiver position, I think you have a lot of guys you love. Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Christian Watson. There's a bunch of guys that can get open, but I do worry down the stretch, NFC Championship game, second round, the playoffs. Do you wish you had a real number one? Do you wish you had a guy like Brandon Ayuk, for example, that one-on-one can just consistently win on the outside? Because although all of these guys can win in their role, I do worry just that biggest moment. I wish I had a guy at number one that I can trust on any given play. And then lastly, just changing defensive coordinators. I think it's hard to get worse than what you had last season because there is a ton of talent. Of course, you bring over Xavier McKinney, who's one of the best safeties in the NFL, so that secondary should get a boost. And when they're healthy, that could be one of the better secondaries in the league. But if this defensive coordinator, if Hafley can take this team a notch up, like we saw Mike McDaniel do with the Ravens defense last season, all of a sudden you have a potential top 10, maybe even top 5 defensive unit. I think the talent is really there to do it. You pair that with Jordan Love in this offense, and that's why we have them top 10, top 9 team, and a team that things break right can win a Super Bowl.
Riv.
No, I was just reading something about Rashawn Gary. Dog, Jersey.
Nice.
Yeah, he's one of them
Michigan.
dudes. Yeah, Michigan. Paramus Catholic.
Facts.
One of them dudes.
Him and Jabril.
Yeah, Jersey. I think for Green Bay, it's really like Dell's mentioned, it's just about who's going to kind of like break out. I think defensively, like we just talked about, you got Rashawn Gary. You got, if Jair Alexander is healthy and able to play in his type of scheme that he likes to play, he can be amazing. They did just pick up Xavier McKinney from the Giants. They have Kenny Clark. Like, they have dudes on the defensive side, Eric Stokes, that I think if this defense is schemed right, play well, they can be great. And we saw it towards the back end of the year when this team had a great game plan on the defensive side of the football. They were one of the best defenses in the league. Offensively, who's going to be the guy to step up? Is Josh Jacobs going to be the guy that can still maintain all those carries, and can he be an efficient runner? Who's it going to be between Dobbs, Watson, Wicks, Reed? Like, who's going to be the superstar that steps up and be that number one? Because I think sharing the sugar is good. I think having a plethora of good wide receivers is good, but you need a game breaker. You need a game changer. You need somebody to, that can be that number one. And they have a lot of guys that could be that, but it's about who's going to step up and actually show us that ability. I think putting Green Bay at 9 is fine. I had them like 11, so that's not really far off. I think for them it's just about having a consistent, because like you mentioned they didn't have a consistent game plan on a week-to-week basis last season, and you saw a kind of a tale of two halves between this team. So for them, Green Bay, it's just about how young they are and putting a consistent game plan, going forward for each game every week. If they can do that, I think they can be one of the best teams in the NFC.
Matt LaFleur had a press conference where he talked about how annoyed he is with everybody talking about a wide receiver
I just
one
seen that.
and a breakout. I agree with him to a certain extent because I don't think that anybody on this team has to break out for them to have an elite level offense. They can all remain the same and still have that type of offense, but they're young enough to the point that you expect them to take leaps in their game. It might not be a leap to where they are one of the 10 or 15 best receivers, but if you have 4 high-end wide receiver 2s on a team, yes, maybe an opposing team's first cornerback can take that away, but then an opposing team's second, third, fourth cornerback probably is not going to be as good to take everybody away. My biggest optimism, and I had the Packers ranked higher, but cumulative, it was 9th. My biggest reason for being optimistic on the Packers is the defensive change. And this is why I think they can win a Super Bowl. Joe Barry, it is hard to understate how awful he was as a defense coordinator. They played quarters coverage, soft zone. It's the reason why Baker Mayfield had a perfect passer rating at Lambeau Field, because Mike Evans, their receivers had free releases off the line.
Yeah.
Bryce Young, 312 yards, 2 touchdowns, best game of his career. Packers, what did they do against them? They played soft. They're giving them free releases. If you give good receivers free releases, they are going to torch you. But I feel like this team, especially in their run defense, you're forcing the defensive line to be responsible for a gap and a half. And instead of penetrating the offensive line, what they do is they stay at the point of attack and try to stay even. And the responsibility now becomes at the second level to safeties and the linebackers to be responsible and have the pressure of making stops in the run game. Versus Hafley's scheme is a 4-3. Now, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark, Lucas Van Ness, all of their edge rushers, Devontae Wyatt, their defensive linemen, they all have to worry about just getting after the passer, being aggressive. When you talk about playing in the run, they just worry about one single gap, penetrating that gap. And now instead of the second level defenders being responsible for tackling in the run, they are more so doing cleanup duty because their defensive line is getting after it in that way and they're being aggressive. Not only that, but Hafley is somebody that plays a lot of man and cover 3 single high safety looks. It's not a quarters look. If you play in that scheme, you really need to rely on your talent to be really good. But the thing about the Packers is I think they have a corner in Jair who is a shutdown corner at his absolute best. Eric Stokes has been phenomenal at camp, and that's why they drafted Evan Williams and Javon Bullard to complement Xavier McKinney. I think the safeties additions they've made this offseason, they overhauled the group from being 32nd in the league to now being a top 5 safety group in the league with Xavier McKinney, who is a ball hawk and makes plays. The Packers last year were 32nd or they were 31st, only above the Titans in getting interceptions. With Hafley's scheme being more aggressive, more cover 3, more single high man coverage looks, you are now looking at the quarterback. You are going to have more interceptions. So I think this scheme benefits these defenders that are so talented. So now we're looking at more turnovers. We're looking at more havoc being created. And I feel like with Joe Barry, he looked great against Kansas City, right? But a quarter scheme is designed to stop someone like Mahomes. You beat us by a million cuts. We bend but don't break. But against other teams in the league, the problem with Joe Barry is that he never adjusted that. He would have success against the Kansas Cities, but that same game plan would be used against Bryce Young. And then Bryce Young would just take the underneath stuff, and he would kill you with that. Joe Barry was so awful. And I think the Packers, now with Jeff Hafley, I'm really a believer in his scheme, and I think this defense is going to be one of the 10 best defenses in football. And with their offense, this is why I think they have such high of a ceiling in the NFC. And they can win the Super Bowl. They can make it out there, NFC, but I think they could win it as well.